I'm Leanne Tran, psychologist who's worked with families whose kids don't fit the mould for almost 20 years. I've worked with children for decades, but I know parents are the real change makers when it comes to their kids. Having 3 kids of my own means I know it's not easy. Parent Like a Psychologist is all about simplifying how you support your kids with psychology information filtered through years of experience to take you from overwhelmed to confident. Come on in. So welcome everyone to another episode of Parent Like a Psychologist, but also welcome to Thomas, Thomas Wilson. It's really exciting to have you join me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
You're more than welcome. And so you're from R&H Creative Advocacy and Storytelling. I loved your little Zoom logo before you logged on, which was the shield with 2 swords. Is that right? Am I remembering it
Mhm.
right? Yeah. It immediately evoked this kind of image that I can imagine kids would find that really engaging and interesting. But can you tell me a little bit about you and your agency and what you do?
Absolutely. In my work, I am a writer, advocate, storyteller, event specialist, oh goodness, advocate, all of these things really tying into this realm of using creativity. And my work expands far beyond just advocacy and writing and storytelling. It also includes family consulting, it includes public speaking, it also includes a kind of ever expanding list of services. One of the things that when I started my business, I was not expecting it to grow so quickly. I knew since I was a real young kid that I wanted to be a storyteller. And I spent a lot of my life as a writer, but not really considering myself as a storyteller. And so in late 2021, when I was at a point where I needed some change, as so many people with mental health and neurodiversities, we run into those moments a lot. I decided, okay, I'm finally going to become a storyteller. I'm going to jump into public speaking, a skill that I had always had. And this point in my life in 2021, it was a really scary point in my life, but pursuing that was something that gave me a lot of hope. It pulled me out of that sadness. And since then, it's been truly wonderful because the reception, not just in my home state or the United States, has actually global, has just been resounding. People have watched as I've utilized creativity in an empathic way for people in the mental health, neurodiverse, and really any community explore how their creativity can define really their identity, but also help them build real life skills. And so, in that, I think one of the greatest things that I've seen is well, two of the greatest things. One, people value creativity, especially when it's taught in the way that they can actually learn and utilize it. And the other thing is creativity. I always say that for kids, we are born with creativity for particular reasons. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people forget when we're kids, we're born with a lot of survival skills, a lot of things that we need in order to live life and to actually be human. And I think in life, we're so often taught to like bury that down or get rid of creativity for the sake of things productive like a job or income and things. And so in rediscovering this love of mine and also doing the work, I've really learned people crave creativity, and creativity is this passageway to not just being healthier, but to re-exploring our love for life through creative passions.
Mm. That's fantastic. And I really relate to that and agree wholeheartedly that creativity is so important. I think I agree that we're often taught not to embrace it because it's kind of, I remember reading some study at one point saying that you can't be actively taking in information and being creative at the same time. And so I think if our schools are designed to just be inputting data, the
Mhm.
creativity kind of gets in the way. But um, at the very least, even if kids don't want to be creative in their job, I think in a balanced life, that creativity and exploring that helps with resilience and enjoyment and fulfillment. So it's, yeah, really important.
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I've heard similar things to that study. I've also heard a lot in my life that this is something I work really hard to challenge, that people aren't paying attention if they're doodling or drawing when you're
Mm,
talking, or if they have a fidget toy, that they're not actively listening. And in a lot of my work, and I'm sure in the conversation today, we'll dive into things like that. Um, but I challenge that because there are so many people who need something to actually help them focus and center in on what someone's saying. I know as someone, as a public speaker and as someone who's listened to many lectures at this point, if I'm just sitting there staring at a screen or staring at someone talking, I'm going to lose interest about a third of the way through, and my brain will kind of spiral into a wide variety of thoughts. It's almost a guarantee that I'm not going to pay attention. And so in everything I do, one of my main focuses is honoring how people take in information, especially because
mm,
I think the way that so many people are taught, well, I don't think I know this, the way that so many people are taught is centered around the speaker, not necessarily the person being taught. And I think that's a deeply flawed way to educate people because you're not really educating anyone, you're just talking at them. And I mean, I could go into a whole long conversation on this alone, but I think we really, and then this is growing in consciousness, I think we really need to understand how people learn and redefine what that is.
yeah, I agree. Even as you're talking, reflecting on me, I've always been someone who learns when I'm writing things down as well, but I don't just write. I usually have things that are in a circle and there's arrows going from one to the other, and it does mimic that the way that my brain processes it. So, yeah, it's great that you're helping kids work out all of that stuff about themselves. And so, how exactly do you do that in practice with the children that you're working with? What are some examples?
And so, I mean, I work with all ages, but a lot of my work is with youth. A big thing that I've really honed in on, and a couple foundations of my work is active empathy, like actively applying empathy and also actively applying dignity. So I know things are always very different. When, it's a mom or a dad telling someone to do something. I think I've even heard like some statistics on how wild it is. Like if a mom tells someone to do that, how unlikely they are to do it.
Right.
Um, but I'm a big believer that a large part of the reason kids don't always pay attention is because of how they're talked to. Not just always how they're educated, but I see a lot of people. I often try to use the word youth instead of kids because I find there's
Hmm.
such a negative connotation with the word. So I am a big believer in treating people like they have some of the information and not talking down to them. I have learned over the course of my life, the youth are a lot more willing to listen if they're treated with respect. And following that up, they're a lot more willing to follow instructions when treated with empathy. I experienced this as a kid. I still run into a lot of youth who have this experience where they're talking about something that's stressful and someone immediately tries to solve the situation for them or tells them how they did something wrong or criticizes them for a part of a conversation they don't think is appropriate.
Hmm.
And with this is true of adults, but it's a great way to get people to shut down and not listen to you. And so when I'm running events or leading talks, a big thing that I also try to do in those active application, both of those, is keep the conversation as interactive as possible.
Hmm.
Um, so when I do Dungeons and Dragons, storytelling events, a variety of different things, and depending on what I'm doing, I will utilize things like drawing or there's one event I do called Stories Meant for Movement, which is entirely built around using a space to tell stories through actions and play and drawings and books and things. And then Dungeons and Dragons, part of the reason I love it is because it utilizes so much back and forth shared storytelling. I think that's why it's growing in popularity around the world so rapidly, is
Mm,
because it's not just one person telling a story, it's a community getting together to tell things. And so, in all of those, the other thing that I really try to emphasize is active listening. And I know a lot of people confuse active listening with paying attention very intently. I like to call it listening to listen, not listening to respond, not listening to answer, not listening to say something of value. It's listening to really hone in on that person and what they're saying and how.
mm. I think those are really useful techniques for parents as well. And the dynamic is different. I know that it is, but it's still along the lines of things that I encourage parents to explore in my programs as well. And I think definitely the respect and coming from things where a kid or youth is at. Um, but there was something else you said as well. That's right. Intelligence, not talking down to kids. They know a lot more than we give them credit for,
Mhm.
but also the active listening. And I think I often describe it as a way to listen to the message, but also like the content and also the emotional feeling and experience. And lots of it is about reflecting back or affirming and not necessarily having something yourself to say next, isn't it?
It really is. And I think part of the reason I go to youth is there's so much bias just on being youth, being a kid. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize it, but so many people carry such an intense bias to their own experience as being a kid that they fuel a lot of that into their frustration with youth to begin with. Um, but I mean, it's hard. It is so hard to be a kid nowadays, or a youth or a teen, whatever the age. Not just because of social media and things like that, but in general, we are kind of at this very strange intersection of understanding mental health better than we ever have, but carrying so much intense bias to the people who have mental health struggles, partly, and I tend to refer to it as like a systemic insurance mindset where like people put so much value on varying degrees of suffering that it kind of has become infused to the idea of like if someone scrapes their knee and it's traumatic for them, people automatically jump to it's not a big deal. Or,
Mm-hmm.
someone has a very intense situation. On the flip side of that, we're often taught, even when we're in a deeply traumatic experience, not to own and honor that. And it's really weird because there's still so many youth who are trying to push back against that, but there's even more bias being placed on them for being considered disruptive or weak and things. And it both sides kind of reflect some very toxic mentalities in their own way as well.
Mm. Yeah, I think it is a really hard time for kids to grow up in. Um, and things are becoming much more complex than they were a generation ago, let alone two generations ago. And then the other thing that you mentioned, technology and stuff, which is part of it, it's a new way of life that we have is has evolved faster than we have, I think. And it's not something that I think as a society, we're really clear on how to do things in the best way. That's a little bit of what you do as well is engage with kids through online mediums and that kind of thing. I guess the questions are, what do you see about the emergence of that digital age and its impact on youth?
I mean, so I have seen so many wonderful things come out of it. Um, I am someone who really believes that around the world, we need to do a better job of educating on things. We've had such a let's scare people off of things
Yeah.
mentality, and that doesn't work, especially with recent generations. It just creates more trauma and more worry, and more shame around using something.
Mm,
Um, but in it, there's so much good that can happen. And when we actually utilize technology in the right way, and I agree, it's popped up so quickly. And like there's been so many advancement, but I think we also have to get more towards a communal space of it. To stop shaming parents who have their kids on tablets at restaurants or things. To put less pressure on kids for seeking education through it. Um, there's so much sense of the self and what can aggravate the self. But when we start to implement a realm of communal understanding and a communal acceptance, we can educate and then elevate this technology to a better mindset.
mm. Yeah, I think it's definitely the answer comes. I mean, it's timely for us in Australia. There's talk about a social media ban at the moment for kids under youths under 16. And I think just, it's just not quite going to get to the complexity of the issue, but also it takes away from a real understanding of how that community mindset can be there and come together to help people to engage and work through some of the challenges rather than the ban is kind of very similar to that scare approach, isn't it? Like ban cigarettes and all these other things that we think are bad. We'll just ban them and it doesn't really do much. But
I mean,
I'm
we have a very,
sorry,
oh,
go
go
on.
ahead.
No, no, you
Um,
you go on.
Um, we have a very similar thing, a very similar mentality in the United States. It seems to often be let's ban the thing and make it go away from public thought so it isn't used. I have always been an advocate that if we actually taught people how to be better, I mean, pretty much everything from alcohol to drugs to many different things, technology, if we actually taught people the reality of things and how to be responsible with them, I feel like it would be very different. And there's giant figureheads around the world who argue this. I don't want to get into it because I don't want to be mean to anyone. But I do want to emphasize that there's real power in high quality education, and equipping people with the right and fair and safe skills in something. And I think that removing something from use entirely, which could very well return in any society at any point, um, we're just going to have people who are far less equipped to utilize it.
Absolutely. I think you can't talk about managing it and help kids well, I say kids and youth, but it's really adults as well in managing it if it's something that we can't, they can't see. But I'm interested to hear you mentioned that you've seen some really great things come from technology. What are some of the strengths and positives you've seen for young people, especially those who are neurodivergent?
So, to start, I'm gonna give a simple answer. I've seen a lot of change. Now I'm gonna kind of break into it. I know a lot of people are very concerned about like online education and the quality of it and online groups and things. But I have worked with, so I do a lot of in-person and online. And I think when someone has the right intention, the right education, and the right methods, online access can be amazing. It can connect people from across countries or states. It can make friends. It can help us explore our understanding of our communication skills, our identity. I have personally seen numerous youth break out of their shell and become very passionate about creativity and
Hmm.
education. I've run classes where I've met some of my favorite people and I've been able to help people build their confidence and their education in a safe and encouraging way. I could go on and on, just don't want to for the sake of time of this conversation. But I really do believe, in partly with that education of using technology well, another thing that can come from that is human connection.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Parent Like a Psychologist. If you found it helpful, please share on Instagram so other parents can benefit too, and tag me at Leanne Tran Psychology so that I can say a big thank you. Head over to leannetran.com.au to join the village for bite-sized psychology tips straight to your inbox. I really hope this podcast has brought a new perspective and you a step closer towards a calm parent and a thriving child. Have a delightful day.